This is the last video in Chapter 11. We're going to be talking about appropriate measures, and this is for lesson 11.5. Appropriate measures basically means that we're going to be taking a look at the fact that sometimes one measure of center, and this is mean, median, and mode, is more appropriate than the other two to summarize a data set. So again, we're choosing between the mean, median, and mode, and we're figuring out which one is the best to pick as a way to talk about the set of data. So in your notebook, you're going to need for this lesson your notebook, and in your table of contents, I have page 76 labeled as just appropriate measures, because that's the topic for the day. The white sheet, it might be colored if I copy it in a different color, sorry. I have a white one. Basically is a one sheet that you just have to trim down a little bit. Make sure you leave a little bit of room at the bottom so that you can have some space to work for the examples. So that is the notes that you can fill out along with what I'm going to talk about. So which one is the best? There are certain criteria. One criteria for mean is if the data has no extreme values. So fill in extreme. If there are no extreme values, you can use the mean as the best way to summarize that data. That's the most common measure of center used to describe data as well. So mean's a good one. For median, to decide if the median is the best, you have to examine or figure out if there are extreme values. If there are outliers, you're going to want to use the median instead of the mean. Oops, sorry. There we go. Also, you want to make sure that there are no big gaps in the data. And if those two things occur, if there are extreme values, if the data set has an outlier, and there's no gaps. Remember, a gap is like cluster around a certain point, and then we have, this little guy over here. This is a gap. There's no gaps, and there are outliers. You want to use the median as the best way to represent the data. Remember, mode, most often occurring number. This one is used a little bit less often to describe data because there has to be a lot of repeating numbers in order for the mode to be the best choice. So if the data has many repeated numbers, at least like half or around there, then you might want to think about using the mode as your best choice to summarize the information. Make sure those are filled in. So you don't have to fill anything in. I just want you to look at some different possibilities, because when you're asked to justify, it's not just about picking, I think we should use the median, or I think we should use the mean to best represent. You're going to want to justify, meaning write a sentence explaining why you picked what you picked. So these are three possibilities of an explanation. It's just repeating what we just wrote down. The mean is the best because there are no outliers. And the mode only represents two data items if there happen to be two repeating numbers. Another possible explanation, if you pick the median is the best because there is an outlier and there's no mode, perhaps maybe in that example. These are kind of just made up. Since this is for the mode, since there are many repeated data values, the mode is the measure of center that best represents the data. That's another way you can justify or say it. So these are three examples of sentences you can use to explain why you picked what you picked. So just another warning, be careful if there are outliers. You have to do that whole process of finding IQR and finding outliers to see if your data has an outlier, because the outliers affect the mean the greatest. It will drag the mean up, or it could drag the mean down, depending on which end the outlier is in the data set. If there are outliers or an outlier in your data, the median might change, but only a little bit. It's not as effective. That's why it's best to use the median and not the mean. And then outlier doesn't really affect the mode too much. So here I want you to fill this in too. When asked to describe which measure of center best describes the data with or without outliers, usually the median will be the best measure of center to use. Now let me explain what this is. You're going to possibly have a question in class tomorrow where it says, look at this data and use all of the numbers. So find the mean, median, mode. And there could be an outlier in there. But find the measure of the center anyway. Now, ignore the outlier. Pretend that little number or that big number didn't exist in that data set and just do the other numbers and find the mean, median, and mode of those. Now, if we could have both sets of information, which measure of center would best represent both? With the outlier, with all of the numbers, or with what you did when you were ignoring that oddball out? Okay? The answer will probably always be median, because the median is okay to use either or, whether there's an outlier or not. It's a little tip. So here's 2 examples, and they're actually on the bottom of your note sheet. There's a little bit of space. The table shows the number of medals won by the U.S. Which measure of center best represents the data? Then find that measure of center. So you want to start by looking at the numbers. Now make sure you're looking at the right set of numbers. We're not really caring about the years. We want to know the number of medals. So look at the bottom row. And I'm noticing that none of them repeat. So mode probably won't be a good choice. And I'm also going to look at the range of the numbers and see if there are any odd numbers that are either really low or really high. That will give me a clue of whether I need to test for an outlier or not. And I'm looking, and all of these numbers are in the hundreds, and there's 197. So it's very safe to say that there are no outliers. Therefore, the mean is the best measure of center to use. And here is a way to talk about that. So since, and it's going to be a sentence, since there are no outliers, or repeated numbers, and again the repeated numbers are because of the mode. There is no mode and there are no outliers. Because of that, the mean is the best choice. To represent the data. So in one sentence, we explained why we chose the mean as the best measure of center to represent the data. And then we would find the mean just like normal. We would add up all of these numbers. At this point, it does not matter that they're in order or not. We would just add them up. You can go ahead and do that. How many numbers are there? There are 5. When we add all of them up, I did it beforehand, is 523. If we divided that by 5, we would get a decimal or a mixed number. I'm going to keep it as 104 3/5, or if you're using a calculator, 104.6. And there we have the mean. So explanation, this is the justification, and then we found that measure of center. Example 1, done. Example 2 is just a list of numbers. The context is that they are describing the number of points scored on a quiz. Again, we have to do the same thing. Which measure of center should we pick to represent these numbers? Mean, median, or mode. So let's look. Are there any repeating numbers for that mode to be in a good choice? I don't see any, just like before. Again, for mode, there has to be at least half being the same for you to even consider it. So now we're going to look to see if there are outliers. And I'm looking at 80, 80, 90, 90, 90, and 100. That's really close together. And now I got this one, and I did put these in order already for you. This 15 is really small compared to the other numbers. I'm thinking this is an outlier. And to prove it, we would do exactly what we did in the other video. We would find the IQR, and then we would multiply that by 1.5 and subtract it from the 81. 81 is going to end up being our Q1 here. So that should give us that lower boundary, so we would definitely prove that yes, 15 is an outlier. It is an outlier. Here's our justification, and that's what we're focusing on right now. The justification is that because 15 is an outlier, the median is the better choice if we were comparing between mean and median. So the better choice than mean. It is important to note that there is no mode, so I'm just going to end with that as my conclusion. Whoops. There is no mode. And then we would just simply find the median. Here's one pair, second pair, and we have our 90 in the middle. So the median is the best choice to represent, and the median is 90. So in class tomorrow, we're going to practice justifying. We're going to practice picking the best one. We're going to write some more than usual, and we're going to continue to find our measures of center, with our outliers potentially being something that we would have to find and prove as well. The final slide right here for you is one to try on your own. Again, we're finding which measure of center best describes the data, justify with a sentence or two, and then find it. Here are your data points to consider. These are minutes spent or time spent exercising. Have fun. See you in the morning.